Today we will be looking at a case from the early 20th century, so sit back as we go to England. Amy Margaret Reeves was born on the 27th of November 1900 in the town of Chertsey in Surrey. She lived with her family in the small village of Longcross, which was just 20 miles west of central London. Her father, Mr. Arthur Reeves, worked as a gardener at the Royal Holloway Sanatorium in the town of Egham, which was about 5 miles from his home. It was steady work, but the pay was modest, and the family lived without many comforts. A mother named Esther took care of the children and managed the household. However, just before Christmas in 1910, tragedy struck when Mrs. Esther Reeves died. Her passing left the home subdued, and the children were left to face each day without the steady comfort of their mother. But despite this, they learned to manage as best they could in a quieter and lonelier household. Amy, who was now 10 years old, attended the local school, and like other girls in early 20th century England, she was taught basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and domestic subjects, which were designed for girls, as they were eventually expected to take up roles, either within the home or in service. On Tuesday, the 18th of July 1911, Amy did not attend the morning lessons in the school. Instead, she stayed at home to help her sister Ethel with the chores, and when she had finished, she went outside to play in the garden. However, at around 12:30, she said goodbye to Ethel and made her way to school for afternoon classes. Ethel watched as she started to walk across the common. The school day ended promptly at 4 o'clock, and children began to make their way home. Most returned in groups, chatting and laughing as they went, but strangely, Amy was not among them. When she failed to come through the door at her usual time, her elder sister thought that she was probably playing in the fields, but as time passed, she started to worry. Wondering where she might be, Ethel went outside and made her way to the usual spots where local children gathered. But when she asked those playing in the field if they had seen her sister, the reply was both unexpected and troubling. They told her that Amy hadn't been to school that afternoon. That simple statement changed Ethel's mood entirely. What had begun as mild concern quickly turned into deep worry. The realization that Amy was not just late home, she was actually missing. Mr. Reeves arrived home at 8:30 in the evening and was greeted by his eldest daughter, who was by now in a state of panic, as she told her father that Amy had not come home. For a moment he stood still and said nothing, the meaning of the words still sinking in. It was unlike Amy to be out late, especially without telling anyone. She was a quiet, dependable child, never one to stray far or cause alarm. After a few moments, he set down his tools and immediately began asking where she had last been seen. Ethel replied that she had left the house at 12:30 that afternoon, and that she saw her walking across the common towards the school. Mr. Reeves immediately began asking neighbours if they had seen her, and when no one had, he gathered a group of local residents, and together they set out to search the surrounding area. Lanterns in hand, they scoured the village lanes, nearby woods, and the uneven ground of the common. They looked in ditches, behind hedgerows, and along every path. But with each minute that passed, they became more anxious. At around 10 p.m, Mr. Arthur Reeves went towards a small pond on Chobham Common, which was about 400 yards from the family home. The spot was known locally as a place where children sometimes went paddling. And there, on the bank, he saw a pair of shoes and some stockings, neatly placed, as if a child had taken them off before stepping into the water. Then he saw Amy, face down in the pond, her head among the weeds. He pulled her from the water, hoping desperately that there might still be a flicker of life, some movement, a breath, any sign that she could still be saved. But there was nothing. Her small body was cold and lifeless, her soaked dress clinging to her, and her face eerily still. In that moment, all hope drained from him. His beloved daughter was dead. The bereaved father, who was still grieving the loss of his wife just months earlier, now faced a fresh and devastating blow. The quiet foundation of his family life was now shattered for a second time. He laid her on the bank and shouted out for help. Others from the search party soon arrived, and a lantern was brought forward. In the flickering lights, they saw signs that deepened their horror. Bruises and wounds on Amy's head, and trampled grass around the edge of the pond. It was clear to them that she had not simply fallen in. The authorities were contacted, and police officers and a doctor soon arrived at the scene. By the time midnight had passed, the little body had been carried to the mortuary. Dr. Hodgson conducted the post-mortem examination. He found 3 wounds on Amy's head, one above the right eyebrow, one on top of the head, and another on the back. The injuries were not enough to cause death, but they may have stunned her. He stated that it would have been very difficult to receive such injuries by simply falling into the pond, and suggested a blunt instrument such as a stick could have caused the wounds. According to Dr. Hodgson, death was likely due to drowning. There had been reports of other incidents involving young girls in the region. Edith Neal, a child from nearby Staines, had disappeared after being lured away by an unknown man, and no trace of her had yet been found. Another girl, Alice Dawes, had been assaulted on a rural road near Waltham Cross in Essex. These events, combined with Amy's death, now caused an even greater sense of concern among the people in the district. At first light, the police continued their examination. The pond itself was small and tucked into a hollow among the bracken on the common. It was familiar to all the local children and easily reachable from the cottage where Amy had lived. As word spread throughout Longcross, fear and sorrow settled over the village. What had happened to the little girl, and who had done this? It did not take long for officers to make an arrest. A local teenage boy was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. However, due to his age, his name was not released. The inquest into Amy's death was scheduled for the following day, Wednesday the 19th of July. Until that time, police continued to question those in the area and examine what evidence they had been able to gather from the pond and its surroundings. The inquest took place in Chertsey Town Hall, where 15-year-old Albert Henry Hampton sat in the dock, a familiar face to many in the town. However, as the spectators and the press settled in to witness the proceedings, Police Superintendent Mears stepped forward to announce that the hearing would be held in accordance with the Children's Act of 1908, and that as a result, members of the public would have to leave the courtroom. The spectators reacted with murmurs of surprise and disappointment, but young Albert Hampton appeared unmoved, and it was not clear if he fully understood the significance of the ruling. When the inquest eventually got underway, Superintendent Mears described what he had seen on Chobham Common the night the body was discovered. He said that the pond was actually little more than a muddy hollow, which measured just 11 feet by 10 and held no more than 9 inches of water. He added that beneath that, there was another 9 inches of mud and thick weeds, and there was some rubbish on the bottom, where people had thrown tin cans. Looking straight at the jury, he said that it was here that Amy's father, Mr. Arthur Reeves, had found the child. Superintendent Mears then said that he examined her body and noticed 3 wounds. He added that in the middle of the pond, there was a stick that was protruding slightly from the water. He said that he retrieved it and found it to be a 2-foot-long birch branch, and embedded in the bark were several strands of long light brown hair, which looked like they had come from a human. He explained that he then walked across the common and cut a branch from a nearby birch tree. He then presented both branches to the inquest, noting that they looked very similar and it was clear both had been freshly cut. The next witness was Amy's older sister Ethel. She fainted while giving her testimony, and the proceedings were paused for several minutes. When she recovered, she said that that morning she saw Albert Hampton and Amy in the garden together. She said that they had made a small fire and placed bricks around it, and then boiled some water. She added that Albert was often in their garden, as his uncle and aunt lived next door. She spoke in a soft voice, but managed to say that around noon, Amy had come inside for a piece of bread and butter, and then went to school at around 12:30. She said that sometime between 2 o'clock and 2:30, she saw Albert again, walking up the garden path, and looking slightly unsettled, like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how. She said that he then asked her whether she was still working, and told her that he had been asleep under an apple tree, and was now heading to his aunt's to borrow some tea. The courtroom was strangely quiet during her testimony, every ear straining to catch her words, as she recounted the events of that afternoon. She said that Albert returned about 30 minutes later, still holding the stick, and joked with her about helping her with a potato patch. Ethel added that during their conversations, there was no mention of Amy, as she had assumed that her sister had just gone back to school. Miss Reeves was then questioned about how long she had known the accused, to which she replied that she had known him for many years, as they had gone to school together, and although he had recently moved to Chobham, he often came back to Longcross. She was then asked about the significance of the pond, and she replied by saying, for as long as she can remember, children had always gone to the dipping hole in the summer, but in recent years it had become muddy and unpleasant, so was not as popular now as it used to have been. Superintendent Mears asked if she had seen anything in Albert Hampton's hands that day, to which she replied yes, he had been carrying a freshly cut stick. The questions for Miss Ethel Reeves continued, and when she was asked if she had seen anyone else that afternoon, she replied that she had, at some time between 1 and 1:30 p.m, when a man dressed in working clothes, who she did not recognise, came to the house and asked for a glass of water, which she then gave him. She said that he told her he was looking for work and heading to Fairview, which was a house that was being built across from the school. She added that he came on a bicycle. When asked by the foreman of the jury how the man who asked for the water had been dressed, she replied, like an ordinary working man. Mrs. Martha Stevens also provided testimony. She was the wife of Mr. John Stevens and aunt to Albert Hampton, and lived next door to the Reeves. She said that she had seen Amy briefly around 10 a.m. on the day she disappeared. She added that she had been surprised to see her nephew, but he told her that he was looking for work. Mrs. Stevens said that she did not hear any screams or sounds of distress that day, nor did she see anyone carrying a stick. Looking down, as if unable to look out at the court, she went on to say that for a year or two, Albert had worked in the village as a houseboy for Major Parry, but was unable to continue following his parents' move to Chobham. So instead, he occasionally worked for a lady named Miss Winch, mostly doing odd jobs. She described her nephew as gentle by nature and noted that he had never shown any sign of bad temper towards her. His father, she said, was a very poorly man, and his mother, though still living, had been seriously unwell. She said that Albert had sung in the church choir and was a regular presence at services in Longcross. She insisted that he had always been friendly with Amy and her brothers and was known to play easily with the children in the village. Mrs. Stevens concluded by saying that to her knowledge there had never been any quarrel between Albert and the Reeves family. Inspector Pike also gave testimony. He told of how he had arrived at the scene around 11:15, when the little girl's body had already been taken from the water and placed on the bank. He said that her boots and stockings were neatly set off to the side, and although she was no longer in the pond, her clothing was saturated with mud and water. He said that nearby there were signs that a birch tree had recently been cut, so he gathered a handful of fresh chips beneath it and noted that the tree was roughly 200 yards from the pond. The inspector added that a further search led him to a woodshed behind the home of Mr. Stevens, Albert Hampton's uncle, whose property was next door to the Reeves household, and inside, leaning against the wall, he found a wood chopper with leaves clinging to its blade. The leaves, he claimed, matched those found around the pond, where Amy's body had been discovered. He then said that later that night, his officers found Albert walking in Chobham, and when they told him that they were arresting him in connection with the death of young Amy Reeves, the boy replied, "I'm sure it was not me, sir." The inspector also said that when at the police station and the charges were formally read, the only reply that Albert Hampton gave was a quiet no. As the first day of the inquest drew to a close, because of his age, the court were unsure as to where Albert should be held, but eventually it was decided to take him to the prison at Brixton to await further proceedings. On the way there, Albert told officers that he was not in fact holding a birch stick on the 18th of July, the day that Amy Reeves was killed. He was carrying a cherry stick, one he had cut himself, and he even told officers where he had left it. The inquest resumed on Tuesday the 25th of July, exactly 1 week after Amy had been killed. Her father sat quietly in the gallery, while Albert Henry Hampton, who was a boy of just 15 years old, sat under guard, watching the proceedings with little expression. Albert Reeves, Amy's 12-year-old brother, was the first witness of the day. He told the court that on the 18th of July he went to school with his little sister Winnie and returned home at around 12:45 p.m. He said that as he approached the house, he noticed Albert Hampton standing in his aunt's garden, and then after lunch he saw him again, and he seemed to be quite restless, and was observing everything that was happening outside. Police had now traced the man who had knocked on the Reeves' house, asking for a glass of water. His name was William Scammell, a painter from the town of Egham. Mr. Scammell took the stand and said that he had gone to Longcross looking for work, and as it was a hot day, he stopped at the Reeves' house at about 1:40 p.m. and saw a young woman, who he now knows to be Miss Ethel Reeves. He said that he went to a house being built opposite Longcross Hill, but was turned away, so headed back towards Egham. He said that as he cycled there, he passed a man named John Tabor, and also passed a man in a coal cart. He said that these were the only people he saw. Dr. George Hodgson, the police surgeon, told the court that when he arrived at the pond, he found the 10-year-old girl Amy Reeves lying on the bank. He said that after briefly examining her, her body was transferred to Chertsey Mortuary, where he performed a post-mortem alongside Dr. Viney. He said that the girl's face was pale, her tongue was slightly protruding between clenched teeth, and her hands were still grasping water weeds. He added that he found mud in her mouth, on her teeth, and on the right side of her face and head. He stressed that while there were no marks on her body, he did find bruises and scratches on her legs. On her head, there were 4 wounds, one above the right eyebrow that exposed bone, another on the back of her head, which was about 2.5 inches long, a third that was lacerated across her forehead, and a fourth on the base of her skull. Dr. Hodgson said these wounds would have stunned the child, but were not by themselves fatal. In his opinion, Amy Reeves had drowned. Next came Flora Batchelor, a neighbour of the Reeves. She said that she had seen young Albert Hampton in the morning of the day of Amy's death, carrying what she described as a stout stick. She said that he remarked that it was a cherry stick, but would make a fine cudgel. The coroner then intervened by telling the court that a cudgel was a short, thick stick, typically made of wood, which is often used as a weapon and can be wielded easily with one hand. The fact that Albert had claimed it was a cherry stick was quite strange, as it was a birch stick that had been found standing upright in the mud of the pond, where Amy's body had been found. Mrs. Flora Batchelor was followed in the witness box by Professor Pepper, a forensic expert from the Home Office. He had examined the stick found at the scene, with strands of hair embedded in the bark. He said that these were light brown and consistent with Amy's hair colour. He told the court that in his opinion, the girl had been likely standing in the pond when someone struck her with several blows in quick succession, and the force of the attack had caused her to fall into the water, where she drowned. Several other witnesses reported seeing Albert Hampton in the area that day. Some said he had mentioned that he was looking for work. Others said that they thought that he was just simply passing through the village. All of them noted that he was carrying a carpet bag slung over his shoulder, which he did not appear to put down at any point. His manner, they all said, was generally quiet, though a few remarked that he seemed hesitant and uncertain, as if he was unsure of where he was going or what he was meant to be doing. There were reports in the newspapers that Albert Hampton had told the police that he had seen a man go down onto the common and that he had told his aunt about it. Police had apparently asked him what the man looked like, and he had replied that he was a tallish man. Due to this, Mrs. Stevens was recalled to the inquest and asked by the coroner if her nephew had mentioned this. She confirmed that he had, and said that it was some time before 2 p.m, but she stressed that she hadn't seen the man herself. The coroner then told young Albert Hampton that he could choose to give evidence under oath, but warned that anything he said might be used as evidence against him. Mr. Arnold, representing the boy, said his client would not be giving evidence. In his summary, the coroner said that the only physical link between Albert Hampton and the murder was a birch stick with human hair attached to it that was found near the body. He outlined that Ethel Reeves had said that the boy had been carrying a birch stick, but another witness had said that when she saw him later, he was carrying a cherry stick, which matched the type Albert Hampton had said he cut and later threw away. The coroner reminded the jury that the police had found the cherry stick where he said he had left it, and also confirmed a cherry branch had been freshly cut. The coroner noted that if Albert Hampton was guilty, it seemed unlikely that he'd have drawn attention to the stick so openly. The coroner then said that Albert Hampton had made inconsistent claims about his whereabouts that day, but his statement about seeing a man on the common was supported by his aunts. As for the motive, the coroner said that there appeared to be none. Albert Hampton was friendly with the Reeves family, and especially Amy. If someone else had done this, what could their motive be? There was no sign of any indecent assault, and the coroner suggested that someone may have gone to the pond for water, seen the child, and for some unexplained reason attacked her. But he stressed this was only a possibility. He reminded the jury that while circumstantial evidence can be strong, it must be weighed up carefully. After deliberating for 25 minutes, the jury returned. Albert Hampton stood anxiously as the foreman delivered the verdict. He said that the jury had concluded that Amy Reeves had been willfully murdered, but there was not sufficient evidence to say who had done it. Despite the verdict, Albert Hampton was not altogether free. He remained under arrest and was returned to Brixton Prison as the investigation continued. However, the following day, he was allowed to return home after a £25 bail was paid. Then on Friday the 4th of August 1911, following more police inquiries, Albert Henry Hampton was discharged. The police continued to investigate, but were unable to find the perpetrator. Despite extensive efforts, including surveillance and interviews with potential witnesses, the investigation hit a dead end. The lack of concrete evidence and the elusive nature of the suspect made it increasingly difficult for the authorities to make any significant progress. The case remained open, but as the months turned into years, the chance of solving it significantly diminished. Although his life was now overshadowed by suspicion, Albert remained in Surrey. In the years that followed, as Europe was engulfed in the Great War, he enlisted in the British Army, joining the 4th Hussars before being deployed with the British Expeditionary Force. At the front, he showed remarkable resilience, and on the 7th of July 1917, he was wounded in action, with both of his legs getting injured, the right one more seriously. His bravery did not go unrecognised, and he was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The recognition marked a turning point for him. The brave soldier, once shadowed by whispers and doubts, had now, through his actions in war, reclaimed his reputation, earning respect and admiration on the battlefield, rather than suspicion in civil life. No one else was ever tried for the murder of 10-year-old Amy Reeves, and what actually happened to her on Tuesday the 18th of July 1911 is not known, and the case remains officially unsolved. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case